Leave your ego at the door and get ready to be raw. This is Strength to Overcome, where real men find their strength in weakness. All right, guys, welcome back to the Strength to Overcome podcast. I'm your co-host, Ryan, here as always with my man, Matt, and we have a special guest on the show today. Mr. Corey Campbell, a.k.a. Flash, is here with us. And Corey, we're pumped to have you with us, brother.
Well, thank you for having me. It's an honor.
You know, I'm going to have to just keep calling you Flash. I've given up.
That's okay. If it makes you feel better, it is stuck. I still have some Flash themed shoes, a lot of Flash names for things, so it's still around.
So where did that come from?
It's just.
Do you remember the story?
Well, I want you to give your version of the story, but at 180 Fitness, I try to give every single client a nickname, and you know, obviously, I called you Romeo for the longest time, and I'm going to stick with Ryan now. But you know, Corey here, obviously, I want to hear his version of how he got his.
Well, I don't want to say that. I don't even want to know like what it was like exactly at that age, but I was definitely very confident, let's just say. And I remember I was just obsessed with, I was in the superhero phase. I was a little ahead of my time. And I was obsessed with Superman. And when I realized that he gave people nicknames, I was like, if I've got to have a nickname, I might as well have like Superman or something cool. And he immediately shut it down. He's like, I don't do that. It's not one syllable. He's like, nicknames are short and sweet. He said, they're one syllable, and or like they're quick. And he said, I'll give you Flash. And I was like, well, it's a superhero, but I hadn't ever really thought of the Flash before. So I was like, I'll try it. And then it kind of turned into a bit of an identity for me, and it's stuck all these years later.
Well, that's so great for you to recall that, because at the time we met through you being part of the Johan Creek Tennis Academy.
We did.
And so you were a tennis student. At this time, I believe you were, what, 17?
I think 18 and a half or 19. I think 18 and a half, because I had just done my first year of college and come out of it, and I was early for my grade. So I was 18 and a half when we first met.
So
that's right.
This was, 2012?
18-year-old Corey.
Was this 2012?
Yeah, 2011, 2012.
Yeah, so we were running around the same sort of circles here, and of course, I made Flash stick. We got some stuff stitched on your, 180 gear, and, we actually, ran with it pretty hard. And you obviously turned yourself into the fastest, player within that academy, and you kind of really owned it.
Yeah, definitely. It kind of stuck with a theme of my tennis for even now. I still defend pretty well when I can kind of get my body moving.
It's funny. I told Ryan this, back then I loved to put together little montage clips and videos, and I actually told him the other day, I said, there's only two people that I did that for on a personal level. I did some professional things, but, for the gym and that, but there was only two people I ever did it for on a personal level, and you guys actually have, YouTube videos that I launched. And it's funny because back then I thought, I was doing great. It's like 13 years old with 500 views, which, these days, you want 500 views in the first day, but they're great clips. Would have to maybe put a link to those just to...
Well, I don't know if Ryan knows. I only did mine because I pressured you so hard, because Ryan's I thought was so cool that I wanted a tennis version of it. And I think honestly he only did it because he wanted me to stop asking him to do it.
Perhaps. Persistence ended up beating me down, but to me, I just, I rewatched them the other day, and they're really, pixelated and not great quality because of the time they were done, but they just highlight how hard you guys actually worked back then. And to me, it was such an honor to work with both of you, because, and I've told Ryan this, I'll tell you now as well, Flash, you guys were pretty much, in the top 5 clients of my entire 20-year career of like how hard you worked and how much you put in and how exhausted you allowed yourselves to get under my care, and then you'd show up the next day and you'd go again. And so I pushed you guys so hard, and it was such a joy to train you guys. So you deserve the videos. They don't have many hits, but maybe we could, get them to go viral after this.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Well, I wanted to sort of share a little bit of the backstory on this. Ryan and I have started this podcast, and we're very excited to be doing this. We're obviously driven to help men out there that are struggling with a lot of different areas, and so we've kind of put ourselves out there on the line. We've shared some things that are very personal and vulnerable, and it was funny because I was looking through my phone here just the other day, and the last time you and I had texted, Flash, which, it's intermittent over the last 12 or 13
Yeah.
years. It could be a couple of years between texts, and then there'll be a handful, and then you'll go missing again, or I will, whatever. But it was last August. And just the other day, I'm looking at it now, but just the other day you reached out and you said, "Hey, bud." It was early in the morning, and I'm like, that's interesting. So, I said something back about, "Good morning, my good friend. How are you?" And you said, "I'm good, man. How have you been? I had you on my mind today." And it gives me chills reading it. But at the time that I got that, I was just being put in this brace after having surgery. And to be honest with you, I was pretty down. And when that text came through out of thin air, I realized that there was a divine intervention connecting you or mine to say, "Hey, you've been on my mind lately." So walk me through a little bit of that and sort of what you were thinking and how that came about, because I want the viewer to know that that was completely random and it just happened to be right when Ryan and I were kicking this idea around to launch it, and it was like, are you kidding me? I got to get him on the show.
Well, so that morning I woke up sort of like you have said, we've just kept up with each other every few months or, 6 months or so, depending on the year, just over the years. And so I woke up and I just had this super strong feeling. I don't know if everybody knows what it's like. It's hard to describe, but just, I kept thinking about a lot of memories with you. And it just made me just really want to reach out. And the funny thing was you sent me a picture of your arm in this, contraption. The text I was going to initially send was one making fun of me having torn 2 tendons because I was always getting hurt. I think you stressed more about me possibly injuring myself doing something not tennis related than you did ever about me doing anything tennis related. I think I was trying to jump off houses and all sorts of other crazy things.
Yes, you were.
And but just for some reason, I decided not to say that yet. I was like, come in a little softer, just not 100 miles an hour. And you sent that, and I was like, I've got to tell him, because I had actually tore 2 tendons in my wrist and my dominant hand, September or October of last year. And I was out of work for a very big period of time, probably 3.5, 4 months, and really just have started slowly coming back. So it was a very funny happenstance that was the day that I had decided to reach out. Things usually work out like that with us.
Yeah, and it's funny because Ryan and I have talked about this, how we've both had stints with Facebook, but then through the darker times, you really just shut down and go missing. And it looks to me like through that timeline, you kind of did the same thing.
Yeah, and the weird thing was, I don't think I realized that I had done it in the moment. And it wasn't immensely sudden. But once I kind of went down that road, the downward slope was very sudden, and I was struggling to get through days. And I remember just the feeling of, I don't know how people can think about next week or this, all these other, even things that we need to stress about or we need to worry about. I was like, I'm just trying to literally make it to lunchtime, and then I'm trying to make it to, dinner or supper. Then I'm trying to make it to before we go to bed. And it was that was what my days felt like. And so that, it's a heavy feeling, but you fall away because you don't have the emotional capacity to even take in other people's, things.
Was that because of your injury, because of the hand?
I think a little bit of it. I mean, technically speaking, that it's kind of what drove me to that point. But when I injured myself, I teach and play tennis for a living still. And then almost all of my really passionate hobbies, like shooting, for instance, all of them are very active and all require my right hand. And I think that was probably the first really big time in history I'd had a super big identity crisis, because the thing, because once I first tore the tendons, I wasn't entirely sure what was going to happen, how much I would get to play tennis again or what that would look like if I was. And I think it created this just massive fear. And then it turned into just this very weird self-talk that I had never, you guys both knew me, and obviously Matt has been around me a lot to know that my general demeanor is very upbeat, incredibly almost annoyingly positive at times. You just want to punch me in the face at sometimes. But and that was just not present anymore. I can't tell you how many times out of nowhere I just started telling myself how much I hated myself and how low I was, and the more I did that, the farther down the spiral I went, and it kept becoming a revolving door of, I also can't get myself out because I was injured with my wrist. So it just kind of, I think, was the catalyst that broke the dam and just rushed all of it out.
Wow. So you're a tennis pro that's your main career, right?
Yes, and that's what I do full time.
And tennis is a little bit different than golf, where, I can teach golf when I'm injured, but you can't really, I mean, when you're a tennis pro, you're hitting with your students, your clients, right?
Yeah, there's some very like rare just exceptions to the rule if you were, coaching certain high level players, in multiple groups where they can do all the hitting. But in a lot of the settings that I found myself in, I was either having to hit or would be feeding tennis balls. And I ended up in this big, long, cast up to my elbow. Couldn't even hold a tennis racket. So like that was completely out of the question. Even trying to do left-handed, I couldn't hold a tennis ball with this hand. So it just turned into what do I do? And the only option, my work was awesome about, I wasn't working, there was no issues with me thinking I wouldn't get fired or anything. But for us in this profession, I assume similar to golf, if I'm not working, I don't really get paid much of anything, if at all. So that also turned into a massive kind of strain for me, at least mentally.
Walk me back through, I don't know if you said it and I blacked out, but how and what was the moment where you tore them? What were you doing?
So I think it honestly was just a progressive injury. I maybe had like a micro tear at some point, and just because I'm teaching all day, it just kept getting worse. And funny enough, as life would be this way, the match that I played where I had told my teammates, I was like, this is the last match. I can't play anymore. Like, I've really got to rest my wrist because something's wrong with it. That's the match where it finally gave. And I felt that it just lost all the feeling in my arm. I kind of really couldn't move it a ton. And then I knew something was up at that point. And that was like right at the end of September, October.
And that's when they put you in the cast?
Yeah. And that's when they put me in the cast. And I actually panicked hearing that I was going to be in a cast for months. And so I told them I needed to think about it. And I left the doctor's office and didn't do anything with it for a weekend. It gave me a couple of days to adjust, and then I went back. I was like, okay, I'll get the cast.
So no surgery.
Yeah, that sounds like
me.
Yeah.
Yeah, but thankfully no surgery, but just with tendons, they just took forever to heal. And, I still feel a little bit of it now, but we're definitely on the mend. At least. So that's the good thing.
And so you had to deal with a lot of your income is through lessons and that, right? So that went away during that period?
I would say probably 80% of my income comes from lessons.
Wow.
And so most of my income pretty much entirely went away.
So how was that? I'm sure that was a huge stress on you.
It was tough in ways I didn't expect, just because the financial toll obviously is tough. Thankfully, my fiance at the time, wife now, she was able, she had saved up a lot and was able to kind of get us through some of the tougher sections of that. But then also, to be honest, the emotional toll of feeling like, as cliche as it sounds, like as a man or as the man of our relationship or our house, that I was unable to provide. And then I think that sort of crept into the self-talk, and that crept into like just sitting there watching TV. I would think about, you can't do anything. You can't even take her out to dinner. You can't do this or that. And just beating myself up with stuff like that over months. And so it came at you from a lot of ways that I hadn't felt before and at the same time. And so I think maybe one thing by itself I may have handled slightly better, but I did not handle all of them, kind of rushing in super well, because I also kind of didn't particularly become somebody that I would have wanted to have hung around, in demeanor and just the things that I said and did and acted. I was not a particularly fun person, honestly.
And, I speak to the audience here when I say that you lived with us in Roanoke, Virginia for 12, 18 months during some of that time you were with the academy. And you and I ran around town like a couple of knuckleheads. I mean, obviously I'm older than you, but boy, did we have some fun. And I remember just getting into all sorts of, clean, but just mischief and having a blast in every way, doing anything at all times. There was nothing that we didn't have fun with. In fact, I think we traveled to Florida together. Did we not?
We did. And with
us on a vacation down here, of all places, and had a blast doing that road trip, sort of stuff. And so to hear that you were at a place where you weren't at that level is, having lived enough now, I realize that everyone's probably gone through something, but to hear about it is just, it's kind of sad that at that point, there was not something that I could have done. I didn't know. I could have reached out, right? But walk me through how you got through it, because you said she was your fiance. You'd already proposed, right?
Yes. So I proposed last year in April. Funny enough, on April Fools. So it kind of fits just the bill of how I like to do things. The venue that I had basically tried to get closed. That was the only day that they could do it, and I was like, we're doing it. And it made it easy to remember. But so it was, we were pretty far into the engagement and already had planned our wedding, which was April 5th. So that was very, very quickly approaching. We were pretty much, within the 6-month mark of the wedding. And so then that was, like I said, that was just very, very tough because we're, planning wedding stuff. Bills are coming in for that. And I think a lot of the strain too for me was I was not particularly emotionally available to help with a lot of that stuff. And when I did help, again, I just was not, looking back on it, especially not in the moment, it was really difficult to see. But in, looking back, I didn't handle a lot of the situations attitude wise the way I also could have. And it was a testament because, me and my wife had a lot of conversations, to her credit, where we'd sit down and she was like, hey, I know it's, life's rough. And so much of this is not, you and the person that, like, obviously I knew when things weren't as bad. And I was talking to her today a little bit, like, to her credit, she pulled me almost entirely out of my slump. If I had been with anybody else or with no one, I would still be in that slump right now. We would not be having this conversation, to be quite frank.
It just goes to show when you've got that person on your side, by your side, whether it be a spouse or someone. In Matt's case, it was someone else in his journey that you can lean on. It makes all the difference in the world.
Well, it sounds like you mentioned the wear and tear. Obviously, as a tennis pro, the demand on you physically is very high, and it's almost like it was always going to happen. And so years prior, you'd been given the right person to be with you through that time. Would that be something you've thought through, that she was planted there well and truly prior to you probably imminently going through that?
I mean, definitely now, for sure. The funny thing is, when we actually met through a dating app and had both had genuinely the worst prior first dates. Hers, a guy pretended to get a phone call, and mine saw me, and I think I must have, as you both will laugh about this because me and Matt used to joke about my height. She must have thought I lied about my height or something, and then turned right around the other way, and what maybe was 5 minutes. And it was just like mortifying. And so I was like, oh, this online dating thing is just awful. And I sent her a message. We had matched. And maybe 2 or 3 days later, I was like, let's, go grab a drink, get dinner. And she ignored me pretty much for like 2 weeks, kept putting me off. What I didn't know was that she had actually had knee surgery, just like a minor, I think she had a tear or something, and just was in this weird brace, and didn't want to like freak me out that she had, some catastrophic injury. So she waited till she had the brace off. And then she finally agreed to meet me, and we hung out 4 of the next 5 days after the first date. So like from the second we hung out, I kind of just knew she was not in the cliche, like she was my person, but it was just somebody you could hang out with. Everything was fun. Sort of like a lot of the times that we'd find ways to make harmless things mischievous. She's quite the prankster as well. So I'm always on my toes.
You met your match.
Yeah. Literally. So I've met, she keeps me on my toes. I think she's actually more of a match than I was. So she was definitely the one who dated down, but I'm okay with that.
What was your lowest point? And I know that this is, digging pretty good here because, we're obviously recording this, but walk me through, at what point did you feel anything other than, I'm going to make it out of this, right? Give me something there that, you may have not shared with anybody else that could lend itself to someone out there that may be in your similar situation.
I actually have not shared this, I don't think, with anyone, but it was probably end of November, December, still in the cast. I'm kind of on the tail end, but don't know anything. And I remember walking just somewhere on the sidewalk, and it occurred to me, I was like, I don't think I would care if I got hit by a car. And it wasn't like I want to jump in front of a car, But I was at the point where I felt like trying was more difficult than some just random accident just kind of making it all go away. And that was kind of when I really, like, gave me a lot of perspective on that, because that stuck with me for a while.
Well, I appreciate you sharing, because obviously you didn't. And I'm
Yeah.
grateful that the Almighty, maybe nudged you back over to, something in a window to distract you as you were walking down the street there. Ryan and I have talked about this, where we've, heard about things people have done or injured themselves or, hurt themselves. And there've been people in our pasts where you just hear about it after the fact. And I think there's a lot of guys out there hurting and have done things or been through mistakes or made mistakes, or something's happened to them. And so, to hear that I told Ryan this, you're probably, one of the funniest human beings I've ever met. And, we had so much fun there. To hear that you're in that position there because of an injury, right? Most people would be like, what's the big deal?
Yeah.
Right? But there was more going on as a man that I think a lot of us don't ever share, in that you felt helpless in every area of your life because of one injury.
Yeah, and I think too, in the wildest way, I mean, obviously I wish it had not happened to some degree, and at least maybe that way, but at least for me now, I noticed with a lot of things, they happen because we need to learn something, and I'm learning enough lessons through enough of those. I kind of see it at least a bit better than I used to, in my 20s, and it has given me a lot more perspective. There's a lot of people I would see, if I'm being honest, or situations I would see that it would be very easy for me to judge and think that I could never get to this point or never get here, or seeing people on the side, homeless people on the side of the road begging for money. You have no idea what got them there. And had I not been with somebody who was so awesome and supportive, I promise I would not have had enough money unless my parents would let me move back in with them. Yeah, which I don't think they want me to do. I would have had nowhere to live either. So all of a sudden I felt a lot more empathy than I definitely think I had previously, just for difficult situations and people. And they also bring out a lot of things in people that may not have come out, prior, but, attitudes and ways we talk to certain people we love. And I mean, and it was hard. It was probably one of the harder things that I had to kind of realize, that it was not just going to fix itself either. And that was super scary, because when you're at the bottom, yes, you can only really go up from there, but like how? Because in that moment, I don't know how you guys have felt at times, but like it's very helpless and just empty and weak.
Well, the thing with injuries are tough, and all three of us have had them here, where, a lot of times the injury itself attacks our identity. Whether we should or we shouldn't, we identify as certain things. You as a tennis pro, Matt as a carpenter, me as a fitness professional. And when we have an injury, even if it's not an acute injury, but something that keeps us from that identity, or it actually disconnects us from that identity that we hold of ourselves, it can just be jarring mentally and emotionally, right? So me sitting here with this neck surgery that I had last year, I'm supposed to be a coach, a trainer, and I can't push a weight over my head anymore. Matt, you physically can't do your carpentry job, something that was providing for your family. And then Corey, same thing with you with, the tendon injury. I mean, it literally put you on the sidelines, and you can't do something that you've been doing your whole life, right?
Yeah, and I think once I also got to that point where I realized I wasn't going into work and going to be doing a lot of the same usual things that I did, I became very lazy as a result of just what am I going to do? I'm just, sitting here, useless, worthless. And even getting to the point where like you're getting up and moving again, like that was tough.
Yeah.
I was just going to speak to that. I mean, I probably mentioned it at the early portion, and if we put a clip or a link to that video that I did, back when you were 18, 19, you'll see that you were ripped. I mean, you were fast, you were sprinting, like you could lift, you could jump, you could run, and I punished you extra because you lived with me, so I really made you earn every
because I lived with you. I was tough to live with, so I just
every 12-pound box of goldfish I made you earn. And so you were beast, and I pushed you pretty hard. And so for you to get to a point where you felt useless and a slug and not even able to move, it just lends itself to how many people out there have probably been in somewhat similar situations from either a high school sporting career, basketball, baseball, football, whatever. They're at the height of their powers, they go to college, and then something happens, and before you know it, we end up with them as a client when they're 45 and they're a mess. It's like, what happened for the last 20 years? Where have you been? And guys like Ryan and I are trying to fix that, or have been trying to fix that over our careers. But to hear about your story, I'd like to know, at any point, was your engagement compromised?
I would say no, not from a, like, we're not getting married standpoint. Like I said, my wife is, to her credit, she genuinely meant it when she was going to stick by through thick and thin.
That's awesome.
Which lends itself to her character. But I think the weird thing for me was, and I don't know how this was for you guys, but did you really talk a lot about how you felt, or like a lot of feelings or things like that, like like your first, like, really, like, catastrophic injury? Because I really did not, and I hated it. It is the most uncomfortable thing. But that was the tipping point for me when that happened, because I had nothing else except to, like, I had to talk about it because I had to figure it out. So certain people became sounding boards, at least if nothing else, to hear me complain or just to hear me talk about how terrible I thought my life was, even though it ultimately wasn't, which was also frustrating, because at the same time you feel guilty that you're complaining of at least for me, a wrist injury, when there's so many people who don't have wrists to get injured. That also goes through my head, and then I feel 10 times worse. But it's just the self, when you're in that place, you're looking for ways to punish yourself because you think you deserve it. And it's just it was just a dangerous place. And I would say that's what's changed for me, but I got there because I didn't really talk a lot about how I felt, and it kind of pushed a lot of things down. Not like I want to talk every day about all of it, but it pushed a lot of things down that probably shouldn't have. And a lot of stress and a lot of fears and failures. And then as you're just sitting there in that dark place, all you want to do is sit there, you just revel and, sit there in the pool of every failure, and you go through them, and there's just a list of all the things you've done wrong, and it's like a ladder.
Yeah.
Now, what made you think those things? Because when you were at the height of your powers, a phrase I love to use, but you were getting it done on a really high level. You're working with a past Australian Open major tennis champion, right? I mean, this is not a ho-dunk like production here. I mean, you're working with someone that's won 2 majors.
Yeah.
And, I ran the fitness for that academy. And so you were at the height of your powers there, and you didn't take failure or fear. You just kept on blasting through. When you fell short of what I was getting you to do, there was almost this understanding that I was just trying to dangle the carrot. No matter how fast or how high or how much you lifted, I'd just give you, another pound, or, hey, you got to move another foot, right? I just kept on dangling the carrot to try and get you to the next level. What was it that allowed that fear to creep in during that time that I had seen, a decade before? What changed?
So the summer leading up to the injury, I probably was playing the best tennis I've ever played. Because I'm still competing. I'm still playing in, money tournaments.
Interesting.
Sometimes when they're like semi close. And I finally, at least for me, was at a place where I felt like I was living up to the potential that I had, even like the potential I had in my head when we were together working. I was finally kind of feeling like I was there. And then the injury happened, and I honestly was not positive if or what tennis would look like after that for me. And so that's when the fear crept in, because I had always been able to physically push through every barrier, and I always had that to fall back on. And then once I didn't have that anymore, that was when I was like, how would I ever, how can I pull myself out of this when I don't even, like, my body can't even hold up to it? And so then, then that's when it was started with one thought. It's one thought that, you start doubting yourself when you never would have. And then the second day it was 2 thoughts. And then it turned into more of my thoughts were about how I wasn't good enough in some way, ultimately, than all the ways that I thought I was doing good, things well.
Yeah, that can be tough, man. Have you thought about, what happens if this happens again? with your, maybe not the same injury, but something similar with the career that you're in. Have you broached that, at least worked through it in your mind at all, of like, well, there's a chance that something like this can happen again to me and I could be in the same boat, and how am I going to react to it?
Yeah, so at least initially, because I definitely want to do this hopefully for a while. There's a lot of more preventative care and just a lot more attention to strengthening certain parts of my body that I know would be prone to more injury.
Mm-hmm.
But I've also thought about other avenues of income and other career paths. Prior to getting into tennis as a profession, I was in sales, sort of like in the gun industry. And so, and I've always wanted to dip my toe back in that water. So, I've played in both of those for long enough that if something like that were to happen, I know I have somewhere to go. But even emotionally, having at least been through something, and it's definitely not as hard as some people have had to go through, certain situations, but having been through it enough, just with enough of, data to know what it would feel like coming out on the other side, I feel like I would handle that a lot better the second time around. Because the first time around, just getting yourself to the point where you can admit things are tough and that I can't really do it on my own, or that I don't feel like I can do it on my own, like that to me was the hardest part of me getting out of my slump. And so I think, and especially now with my wife, we've obviously gotten a lot closer through just a lot of long conversations on nights where I was struggling. And, now I'm in a much more comfortable place with her where I can express a lot of fears and emotions, just because as guys, we tend to think that's it's just so difficult to admit that we're afraid. That's the tough part. So I think even going through it a second time, hopefully would be a lot better emotionally, and because I would know that I've got a fallback.
I remember this brash young teenager that, had all the audacity of 12 young men combined. You were taking on the world and nothing could slow you down. And so it's amazing now to hear this story, live with us for the first time. Your story and how you've worked through it and the maturity that you've developed from it is greater than anything you achieved in the gym. Anything that you lifted, any sprints, any lunges with dumbbells, any combination of workout that I put you through has absolutely nothing over what you have developed in maturity. So I'm personally thrilled to see that you've been able to be somewhat tamed. Not that you needed taming, but you needed some life experiences to become who you were destined to become, right? It's not that you weren't great, but you were missing that component, that humility, that compassion, that now I see you as unstoppable. And this could just be the tip of the iceberg for you.
Yeah, I would say this was one of those situations where the adage of learning from difficulties and adversity actually really, hit home. We understand it, but, ultimately, a lot of the patience and a lot of the perseverance that I feel like I've developed coming out of on the other side of that was, and seeing what caused the I guess, like, that to me is the strength to be able to recognize the next time to, like, kind of lean into the difficulty, knowing that that's what comes out of the other side.
Yeah.
Because I think for me, like, when we were together a lot of the adversity that I felt, admittedly, I had a lot of outside help, and I had maybe God just really felt bad for me or whatever, but, things tended to also work out in my favor a lot of the times, even when it shouldn't have. And it didn't really give me at times the adversity that I think I needed for some of those lessons. And so I think that was the big growth point for me, was being able to hopefully next time see those moments as growth, as opposed to my life is crumbling and falling apart. And because from the outside in, it really wasn't as much as I also thought it was. Half of, some of it was almost my self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, that's wild. It reminds me of that. There was a CrossFit athlete, Matt Frazier, who used to kind of tackle adversity in a similar way, where he would have anything that you would perceive bad happen to him, he would just respond with good. Flight's late, good. Hurt my arm, good. Tore a tendon, good. And it's kind of that, how you what is that formula I've heard before? E plus R equals O, event plus response equals outcome. It's not the event that determines the outcome, it's how you respond to it. So, I think there's another universe out there where we're not even sitting here talking to Corey, because he's still down in the dirt, down on the ground. But through a series of fortunate events, you're here and you're as bright as ever. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's I will say I'm definitely glad that I'm here as opposed to still there, and I think that's kind of what keeps pushing me now that I feel like I'm getting some steam. Is I know and still remember very vividly what that moment and that feeling felt like, and we felt it. It's powerful, and it's it's not something that I really want anybody to experience. Even feeling with some of my tough days now, still I definitely love the way I feel now versus there, and that's I think the thing that pushes me to keep trying to create more positivity and more wins, even if they're just little tiny wins for myself. Just a little self-talk here or there. And I know it sounds silly, but I used to do that stuff in my head all the time when we were together. Nobody knew about it, but it was half of why I was so happy all the time, just because I was my biggest cheerleader, and that was what stopped.
I think a lot of people lose that that cheerleader.
Yeah.
Everybody starts with it, I think, but I think at some point in everybody's lives that little cheerleader gets beat down over and over again, and a lot of times it disappears altogether for a lot of folks.
I have a final question here before we wrap it up, but do you or have you found yourself running into others and you've been able to pick up on something's off, something's troubling them, they need a word? Have you had any kind of experience since, or do you feel like those opportunities are still to come?
I've actually had quite a few, believe it or not. And nothing crazy, but it has definitely made me a lot more perceptive of kind of when other people are having a rough day or a rough week, which also, and just because I have been in a fairly dark place, it definitely makes me feel more empathy for whatever they might be going through. I might not know, might never know, but it definitely makes me kind of, want to be a little bit kinder just in general to people, because you don't, in that moment, you just don't know what people are doing or thinking or going through. And somebody sometimes just needs a smile or, just a, hey, and, so like it drives me to think about the way I interact with people, especially strangers, just because we really just get a tiny glimpse of people every day.
Awesome, man. Well, hey,
That's so powerful, man.
Where can folks find you, Corey? I know are you giving lessons to the general public? Or are you at a country club?
So currently, I'm at a country club. So I work for Trump National Charlotte.
Okay.
And we're in the Lake Norman area.
Awesome.
Obviously, you can find me on Facebook. I think it's still Corey Douglas Campbell, and my Instagram. I'm sure I'll put it somewhere, but it's Corey-Campbell24.
Sure,
and then you can follow along with the recovery.
Yeah, and we'll put your info in the show notes. That way we can get you out there. I'm sure it'd be good to build up your book of clients and keep things rolling down there as you're getting back into things.
Yeah, absolutely. It's good to be busy again. It's a good feeling.
Well, I really appreciate you sharing. I know that, sometimes sharing the darkest moments is really hard, but I want a lot of people out there, and particularly guys, men, that might be struggling with something, just to hear from people that have been so low that they're willing to think about, well, what would happen if I wasn't here, right? And I think a lot of people have been through those moments, and it really sounds to me like you've been given the right life partner that carried you through that, and maybe a few other people. But it's so important not to become an island and do it alone, so we just appreciate you being on the show and sharing that. And I'm pretty sure, it sounds like it's already starting to happen, but I'm pretty sure you've got a bigger purpose to help others, and that's partly why you've been through what you've been through, because I'm watching you grow just on this podcast, and I'm pumped, man. So thank you for being with us.
I appreciate it. It's been fun kind of catching up and kind of getting to see the activity on social media again from you guys, and seeing how life has changed quite a bit since we all worked together all those years ago. But I will say, if anybody, I would want to tell people, I guess, if I could talk to myself at that lowest point now, I would remind them to keep going, because if I don't, all the people who thought I was not going to win. And so keep going. It gets better. You just have to keep one step at a time will get you there, but you have to actually take the steps.
Beautiful.
Love it.
Well, thanks for being on, Flat.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it, guys.
there'll be more of this to come. Powerful testimony. Thank you for being on here. Just want to shout out to everybody out there to stay strong and just remember you're not alone.
All right, guys, we'll catch you next Friday. See ya.